It's great to be here. My name is Tom Standage, and I'm the Deputy Editor of The Economist in London. And I'm also the editor of our annual, The World Ahead 2023, and you've all got the wonderful Greek edition of it on your tables right there. So welcome on behalf of The Economist and all of our people in Greece to the Athens Gala Dinner for The World Ahead 2023. We have a great lineup of speakers for you this evening, and I hope we will be able to have some questions from the audience as well and make this a truly interactive discussion. So we're going to start off with my top trends of what to look out for in the coming year. This is called Tom's Top 10, and you can find this in the publication right at the start, and it's essentially my summary of everything inside. So it's this page here. You can see with the picture, I look a bit like Emmanuel Macron for some reason. Anyway, so I'm going to do the live version of that top 10. You can see covers of our previous editions here, and this is something we've been doing at The Economist for 35 years now, and the Greek edition has been appearing for more than 20 years. And many people contribute to this set of forecasts: the journalists of The Economist, the experts at Economist Impact and the Economist Intelligence Unit, outside guests. So this year we have Eric Adams, the Mayor of New York City, Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and many others as well. And then we also have some forecasts from the super forecasters, and they are the people who won the American Intelligence Service's competition to see who was the best team for making geopolitical forecasts. So I'm going to throw some of those in there as well. So this is my top 10 letter, and here are my top 10. You won't be surprised to hear that Ukraine is number one, because the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is now the main driver of global events. For 2 years, 3 years, it was the pandemic, and now it's very much the war. It affects energy prices, it affects food prices, it affects interest rates, it affects inflation, it affects everything. So what will happen? What happens on the ground in Ukraine has enormous global consequences. We think that there may be some further Ukrainian advances this year, but a resolution of the conflict is extremely unlikely. We think the war is going to go on throughout this year and probably quite a lot longer. Why is this? Because both sides want to keep fighting. Ukraine wants to keep fighting because it thinks it can take back more of its territory, take it back from the Russians, and the Russians want to keep fighting because things are going badly and they're sure they can do better than this. And as a result, we don't think any kind of resolution is likely this year. Vladimir Putin's interest is in making the conflict last as long as possible in the hope that European support and American support for Ukraine will collapse. And the longer he can make it last, the more likely that is. So I think the thing he would really like is the return of Donald Trump, or another Republican at least, in America. And if he can keep the conflict going for another 18 months or so, he may get what he wants. Cold winters in Europe and a deep recession in Europe might also weaken European resolve. So we think that the conflict is unlikely to end this year. And as a result, that brings us to our second trend. We think recessions are likely in Europe, in many countries in Europe, in the US, and it's still possible that we might see a recession on a global level. About a third of the world is probably going to go into recession this year. Central banks have been raising rates very, very quickly. Inflation has been at multi-decade highs around the world. Although it seems to have peaked in many countries, central banks really want to make sure that it's dead, and they're going to keep raising rates during this year, and we're unlikely to see rate cuts until the end of the year at the earliest. But the pain is global because the strong dollar means that countries and companies that have debts and pay their bills in dollars find it much more difficult to do that when you have a strong dollar. The third trend is actually a silver lining from the war, and this is that the conflict in Ukraine has accelerated the transition to clean energy. And don't just take my word for it, this is what Fatih Birol of the International Energy Agency says as well. He says this is a turning point in the history of energy, and this will accelerate the clean energy transition. And we've seen many European countries used record amounts of wind and solar power in 2022, and many countries have raised their targets for how much of their electricity they will get from renewable sources by 2030, in many cases to 100%. So this is very good news. We've seen record investment in energy. And essentially, what's happening is that the war means that there's a very good reason to invest in clean energy, because it's cheaper than importing hydrocarbons from autocratic states, and because it gives you more energy security. So even if you are crazy and don't believe in climate change, you have a real reason to adopt renewable energy, which is good news. So we're going to see more wind and more solar. In the short term, yes, many countries are burning more coal, but ultimately this is going to accelerate the shift to cleaner sources of energy. And we're going to see more nuclear power as well. Germany is not turning off some of those nuclear power stations. Britain was thinking about cancelling a big nuclear power station. Now we're going to definitely build it. And the other big winner, I think, is hydrogen. And hydrogen has a bit of a bad reputation because hydrogen cars are a bit of a stupid idea, but hydrogen has much more potential when it comes to decarbonising industrial processes like steel making or decarbonising shipping. So I think that's another big winner. And in fact, so generous are the subsidies now being offered for clean energy technology, both in Europe and America, that we are seeing tension between Europe and America about whether this violates trade rules. And I say this is a very good problem to have. When we're having arguments about just how generous those subsidies are, we've obviously entered a new world from where we were a year ago. The next question, the next trend, is whether China has come to the end of its period of rapid economic growth. Its population has started to fall. The official figures were announced last week, and some people think its population has been falling for some time. Its working age population, its workforce, has certainly been shrinking. And probably in April, its population will be overtaken by India's. India will become the most populous nation in the world. And you can see that India still has a couple of decades of further growth in its population. It has the possibility of a demographic dividend, a younger workforce that could drive rapid growth, whereas China has a declining population. It's peaked. And China may have peaked in other ways as well. Its property market declined in 2022 for the first time, and it has a number of policies that are slowing down its growth. Its property market has been in a mess. Its government has been clamping down on technology companies, and obviously the zero-COVID policy was hampering growth. Something like 1.5% of GDP, or $250 billion, was spent on COVID testing by China last year. Now the zero-COVID policy has gone, we face a bumpy return to China reopening, and that's the biggest economic event of the year. But the question remains, just how quickly will it grow this year, and how quickly will it grow in the longer term? And are its days of extremely rapid growth behind it? People are starting to suggest that China's economy may never overtake America's in size. This is something that has been considered inevitable for decades, but actually now people are starting to say, you know what? China may never do it, and and America may stay ahead. So the question is, will a slower growing, weaker China be a more dangerous China? Come back to that in a minute. But first, America, the Republicans took the House in the midterms, so we now have a divided government, and that means it's a divided government with very small majorities. So that means there's going to be a lot of factional infighting, and it's very unlikely that we'll see much legislation passed. We're going to see fights both between the main parties, but also within them. Between the parties, the Republicans will launch lots of inquiries into Hunter Biden's laptop and that sort of thing. And there will be the continuation of the cultural divides on guns, abortion, and so forth. But we're also going to see conflict within the parties. Donald Trump is running for president again, and he's certain to be challenged by other Republicans. And Joe Biden wants to run again as well, and he is also coming under pressure to say that he will not run, and that surely he would be able to get more done in his last 2 years if he retired from the stage. But essentially, both Trump and Biden want to run, and so we may end up with a rematch of the 2020 election, which those two men want, but almost nobody else does. Both of their parties would like to switch to a younger generation of new leaders. Flashpoints to watch. Well, Taiwan is the obvious one. Like many forecasters, we were taken by surprise by the conflict in Ukraine, and so we are now saying, well, where else might war break out? We don't think it will happen in Taiwan this year. We think it's becoming more likely, but we think that the chances of shots being fired across the Taiwan Strait are only about 1 in 6, according to the super forecasters. Other places to watch, North Korea, obviously. Iran is either going to have a massive crackdown or the government is going to fall. We honestly don't know which way that's going to go. The border between India and China seems to be heating up. And of course, closer to home, there is the question of whether Turkey might do something provocative with Greece. So there are many possible places where conflict could emerge this year in an unexpected way. And one way to keep tabs on all of this is to look at the shifting alliances. Which alliances are up, which clubs do people want to join, and which ones are down. NATO has been revitalized. The EU suddenly has a new sense of purpose as well. We spoke to Emmanuel Macron in 2019, and he said that NATO was brain dead and that the EU was on the edge of a precipice, and everything has changed since then. The war in Ukraine has reminded us that democracy does not defend itself, that peace does not happen automatically. And so suddenly NATO and the EU, we're reminded why they exist. And of course, Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, and we'll have to see what happens in Turkey, which evidently has a price that it wishes to demand for this to happen. But other alliances are also becoming more important, such as the Quad, the US, India, Japan, and Australia. And my favorite new alliance to keep an eye on is called I2U2, not a rock band, but a food security and clean energy forum that brings together India, Israel, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. This is an unusual supergroup of countries, but I think it's a reminder that clean energy and food security are topics that apply to everybody and can transcend geographical and political divisions. Travel. I know this is a subject of great importance to Greece. I've come to Greece many times myself as a tourist, and we are going to see tourism rebounding to its pre-pandemic level this year. The actual spending on tourism will get back to its previous level, but the total number of trips will not. It will be slightly short of the 1.8 billion that we saw globally in 2019. But because the price of each trip has gone up because of inflation, the overall total will get back to where it was. Business travel will continue to be weak, but tourism has bounced back very strongly in much of the world, and a big question remains, how much will Chinese tourists be able to visit other parts of the world this year? And this is something we're calling revenge tourism, which is where travelers get their revenge on the coronavirus by taking the holidays that they were denied in 2020 and 2021. And there's the old saying, revenge is best served cold, but when it comes to going to the beach, you want your revenge served hot. What's going to happen with the metaverse? I think playing in virtual worlds is something that gamers like to do. I'm a big fan of video games. I think we'll get some clues this year on whether the metaverse is going to become a more widespread activity. And the thing to watch will be Apple's new headset. Will Apple change the game for virtual reality and extended reality in the same way that it changed the game for smartphones and tablet computers and smart watches? It will be interesting to see whether Apple uses the word metaverse at all. I suspect that they won't. I think they will call it mixed reality or extended reality instead. And it will also be interesting to see whether Meta, previously known as Facebook, will stick with its really quite ambitious bet on this technology. Finally, new words and new jargon. Will passkeys replace passwords? This is a very cool new technology. It's supported by Apple, Google, and Microsoft. You can use it now. It already works. And next time you buy a phone or computer, it will be built into the operating system. So that's a cool new technology that could really improve internet security. But there are lots of other new words that we think that you need to know. in this new year, and you can find a list of them, 23 of them, in the centre, and you can see what they all are and what they all mean. So do check those out, upgrade your vocabulary. In retrospect, the pandemic marked the end of a period of relative stability. In geopolitics and economics, we had low interest rates, we had low inflation, we had relatively little conflict. Today's world is much more unstable. We have the unpredictability of geopolitics. We have the aftershocks of the pandemic, most obviously inflation and stagflation in some places. So in that sense, we've sort of gone back to the world of the 1980s that feels familiar to some of us. But we also have, on top of it, extreme weather events and climate change to contend with, and of course, rapid social and technological change. Unpredictability is the new normal, and there's no getting away from it. So we hope that reading The World Ahead 2023, either in English or in Greek, will help you face this new reality with confidence, and I wish you the best of luck in navigating the ups and downs of 2023. Thank you for listening. Okay, great. Okay, now before we move on to our first session, I just want to point out to you the quiz, which is on your tables, and we're going to have a prize giving later on. So please do have a look at the quiz, and please do talk with your other table mates and fill it in. And everybody who participates will get a unique spirit, which is being offered by Diageo at the end of the meal. But we also have 2 good luck charms, and these are handmade good luck charms, from Zulovitz and Dimitris Lambrakis. So there is actually a prize. So please do participate and give that a go. Okay, we'd now like to move on to the first session on Greece's economy in an election year and what will change. And we are delighted to be joined by Christos Stikouras, who is obviously the Minister of Finance for Greece. So, Minister Stikouras, please can I welcome you to the stage.